With each new set of Disney Lorcana, one of my favorite things to do is really get in there and try new cards. However, I know that's not for everybody. So today we're going to be going through 7 new decks, some of them really focused on some new cards and really just trying as many new cards as possible in one decks. Others, just quick pivots, kind of small replacements, getting into some of the more powerful cards in Disney Lorcana and how they could very easily transition from one piece to another piece with some of the cards from Shimmering Skies. But with that, let's get into our first deck. Emerald Steel, the boogeyman of set 4 because of Bucky, who no longer exists, so we have to find other ways to be more infuriating, right? As you can see here, there are a good amount of new cards to try out in this particular deck list. The Mother Gothel Floodborn lineup, the new Inkable 2-cost Robin Hood, so now it's giving us 7 Robin Hoods to shift on to our Robin Hood Sheriff of Nottingham into play. Of course, we're going to keep our Ursulas. We're going to keep Diablo. We're going to gain a new character in Anna. And one of the cool combinations with this list is Anna plus Muses. Anna being a uninkable 2-cost, 2/3 with 2 lore, but the ability of choose one and having multiple uses out of that with the ability to continuously bounce her back with Muse can really threaten the game in a lot of really fun interactive ways. Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo makes a return as well because this is another card that if we're able to play it, we can really abuse a lot of playable cards in this deck, such as Anna, because even when you Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo Anna, you have the ability to pay 2 each time to do multiple things. So if we're able to sing with Ursula, Deceiver of All, and target our Anna multiple times, we actually can therefore make our opponent discard multiple cards or banish multiple characters. Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo also comes into play very nicely with Tinkerbell, Great Fairy, and of course, while you're doing all of this, every single time you sing a song, you get the Muses. The Muses is a character that really hasn't seen a ton of play in set 4, but its ability is one of the best in the game. Having the ability to continuously bounce your own characters back to your hand or bounce opposing characters back to the hand to maintain board position is really incredible for Disney Lorcana. Adding the new song of You're Welcome gives you the ability to kind of write off one of your cheaper characters if you need to, but does give opportunity to remove a character from the board of your opponents at the cost of letting them draw some cards, very similar to how Yzma used to be played in certain Ruby Amethyst decks. All in all, this is a bit of a new package, trying out some new Floodborn characters, utilizing Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo to the fullest, along with still having the powerhouse legendaries of Diablo and Ursula. Of course, Robin Hood Sheriff of Nottingham as well. I imagine this deck does not start off very cheap due to those 12 legendary cards and some of the more expensive super rares, if I'm being honest. But this is definitely a way to start and try a bunch of new things within the Emerald Steel toolkit. Ruby Amethyst remains a core deck with the Madame Mim and Merlin package. However, now, as the metagame develops and changes, we get to really start playing with some new and interactive cards, along with having the ability to try some other cards out again. Mulan being a 1-cost 2/3 is, of course, not really what she does because she's effectively a 2/1, and there isn't a ton of ways to utilize her to the fullest. But having the shift line for Milan Floodborn might be a key way to actually come back in games. This is just a way to really shift in and remove multiple characters at the same time at a very inkable route, so we're not relying on uninkables like Sisu. The 2 Shimmering Skies cards that we're looking at to add to Ruby Amethyst, at least to try and really get an answer if these cards are good enough or not, are Gaston and Elsa. Elsa being a 5-cost, 2/5/1 lore with Evasive Rush and the ability Crystallize to exert characters down, allows for your cards like Snake or Madame Mim Fox or even Goats to trade very, very well. And it also is a really great follow up to Maui himself. Maui coming in, removing basically every character in the game, your opponent's next turn, sometimes they stop and they go to a stalemate and they're trying to figure out the best ways to answer Maui while pressing forward. If they do that, utilizing a character like Elsa to come in and remove the biggest threat again is really a crucial moment in the game. Teeth and Ambitions makes a return here as well. This is obviously attributing to the Gaston that you get to pay less and less for each damage character in play. So even on a turn where we can Mulan and Teeth and Ambitions, all of a sudden our Gaston becomes very achievable character to play to the field. Last but not least, the Ruby Chromacon I think is going to be one of the more playable Ruby cards in the format for basically every Ruby deck. Ruby Amethyst was already in a position where it didn't necessarily need one drops. So adding this card to the board early just means for the rest of the game, cards like Madame M. Fox, Maui, Elsa, all of your characters with Rush come in and just rush for even more. It combos incredibly well with Shift Mulan as well. All of a sudden, you can now do 6 spread to the board, or if you can't shift her and she just puts her in play, going 3 spread to the board is also really powerful. In the end, we're still just a Queen's Castle win deck more than likely, but we now come with more inkable board waves and more inkable cards to buff our characters to make them a little bit more threatening. Even Cusco as a 2/2 can really help you maintain board position in the game. All in all, this is really just trying out new cards, discovering if Mulan finally has a place, if Gaston can be a powerhouse closer for this, and the idea that having one more rush character in the form of Elsa that exerts really help maintain board position, all for an inkable achievement. A lot of the things we're dropping here are uninkable cards that are removal, replacing them with inkable ones, hoping that it makes our deck just a little bit more consistent over the course of a tournament. Amber Steel picked up some very incredible cards for this particular deck. This is also the easiest one to transition into, with all we're doing is adding Daisy Duck and Prince Naveen. The super rare Daisy Duck fits so very well into the Amber Steel Songs package because it does kind of everything you want it to do at a very cheap cost. Her ability to, when she quests, to gain 2 lore, and then your opponent can reveal the top card of their deck, and if it's a character it adds to their hand, you don't really care how many cards are in their hand if you're going to sing a whole new world anyway. The only thing it really changes is the earlier shift options to shift and wheel earlier. But from past experiences, some of the best things that you can be doing is playing a 1-drop on 1 and then playing 2 1-drops on 2 and emptying your hand immediately. So in any game in which we can Daisy into Queen and Robin and then threaten shift lines with the whole new world means the 2 cards that Daisy Duck would have given your opponent don't even matter one bit because you're just going to simply cycle them away with the whole new world. The rest of the deck is still very much intact. It's very close to the list that I played in Dallas Fort Worth to a 70th place finish, just adding a couple more impactful cards. Prince Naveen is basically the best card ever for this list because it gives you the option to simply play a character and then immediately play a song without needing the connection of shift. Very often in games now, your opponent understands that, hey, Ariel's a key piece that I need to remove. I need to remove Robin. I need to remove the Queen. This way, my opponent can't shift and utilize free resources to sing a whole new world or sing a grab your swords. Now, Prince Naveen enables that on play, which means you don't need any other cards in play to gain the full effect to put a character in play and immediately sing a whole new world or sing a grab your swords, or even when in a pinch, just sing and then along came Zeus. I think Prince Naveen is going to be a key piece in Shimmering Skies for Amber decks. This is one of 2 of the decks that I focus him in to really showcase how powerful the card can be in the Shimmering Skies metagame and why I think it's probably the best card in the set. Sapphire Steel really picked up a lot of threatening new pieces to the deck. Cusco is the #1 piece for the toolbox kit of Sapphire, finally having an inkable way on a body to remove items or locations is massive for the Sapphire players. However, adding cards like Sheriff of Nottingham or Mufasa, I think go a long way in really comboing out this deck. A couple new cards that we're adding to really try and figure out if they're good enough or if they're going to make a playable cut for decks in Disney Lorcana are Chicha. Chicha being a 2-cost, 2/1 uninkable, and when you play your second ink in a turn to draw a card, sounds like it's doing a lot of what you want to be doing with Mickey Mouse, with Foshbone Quill, and things like that. The problem is being a 2/1 uninkable really makes it susceptible to so much removal in the game, and I'm not sure how often you're going to draw more than one card for Chicha, and I'm not sure how often we're even ever going to quest with the card. So there is some restraint to trying it, but if we don't put it in decks to learn the lesson, specifically early on, we have a lot of time between now and Vegas to try out as many cards as possible before our first DLCs hit or before the first set championships hit. So since there's so much time, right now is the best time to be trying out cards like this. Donald Duck, adding another way to be Donald Duck is effectively a second Mickey Mouse, except he's on a 5-cost body with 2 lore and does the exact same thing, but he's inkable. That's pretty great. Bringing Beast back to Sapphire Steel is something we haven't seen too much of recently, but I think you really need to utilize this card and the card draw from it because we're not playing a whole new world in this deck. The other thing that the 5 drops do in this particular list is Sing a Friend Like Me. Now, a card like Mufasa is very, very powerful. However, it can, in theory, put you behind a little bit because you remove 2 ink from the game upon playing Mufasa. But if you can sing A Friend Like Me with any one of these playable 5 and 6 cost cards, all of a sudden you are creating a very big friction point in the game saying, hey, yes, I played Mufasa on turn 6 more than likely, but when I played him, I was able to play him, pick up 2 resources, go back to 4, and then sing A Friend Like Me with one of my 5-cost characters to go up to 7. So then very next turn, when I'm untapping, I might be able to play a card like Tamatoa and other cards on top of that. There's a world where you can play Lucky Dime and Dime in the same turn after playing Mufasa, which is all of a sudden creating this 8 lore gain for you, along with developing the board so far past that it might be just impossible for your opponent to come back. I think Mufasa is one of the most interesting cards in the format, and any game that you get to untap with Mufasa still in play, the amount of things that you're going to be able to do in a turn are just incredible, and I just don't know how often your opponent's going to be able to come back from them. Therefore, I think the card might be slightly too slow for the format, but if there's any way to figure out how to make these decks more playable into aggro decks, then a card like Mufasa is going to be a way that just closes games so quickly that the time frame for the aggro decks to win will be even more difficult. Last but not least, the Sheriff of Nottingham is another final edition, basically just being a cheaper character to play on average with 4 lore. Really just having all of these big fat fatties come into play with 3 or more lore on average. I mean, the Tamatoa also has the ability to be 4 or more lore, Mufasa being 4 lore, Sheriff of Nottingham being 4 lore. As long as you can create ways to get to these guys, put them in play, and have Lucky Dime, the clock for the game ends so much faster because now you have so many more good targets and really effective targets, along with crazy abilities attached to them. The key focal points here are obviously seeing if Chica is good enough, seeing if a card like Friend Like Me is an answer to Mufasa, and if you can really gain more advantage out of it. And obviously, Mufasa himself, if he can be playable and good enough. There's just a lot going on here. I think it's a lot of really interesting takes on this list and just some new cards to really play with and get a feel for early on while discovering the metagame for Shimmering Skies. Shimmering Skies really does deliver so many new playable cards. It's really fun to kind of get into this and try this out. The idea that we're getting on August 9th and we don't have a DLC until the end of September means we have a really ton of time to kind of flesh out the metagame. For Atlanta and Chicago, we only had about 2 weeks in between DLC Atlanta and DLC Chicago to really develop a metagame for that tournament. That's not true for this one at all. We get a full 5 or 6 weeks in between release and DLC. That's a lot of time to really play a ton of games and get all the information needed for a lot of these cards. It's going to be really fun kind of tracking that growth and seeing what people bring and what people decide is the best decks in DLC Vegas and Birmingham. Very, very excited to be a part of that. Let me know in the comments what you're looking to start with in this set. I think there's so many new playable cards. I really feel that Shimmering Skies brought some of the more playable cards of Disney Lorcana, finally some strength to it to kind of remove cards in the past and really fluctuate brand new cores into the game and stuff that we haven't seen too much of. We're about to start with the next 3 decks, and they're all Amber decks. Amber really got the biggest push because of cards like Daisy and Naveen, and I'm really curious what you guys think about other cores and what they may have gotten and what we might finally start seeing in Disney Lorcana. Let me know in the comments. And of course, if you haven't yet, hit that like button. Let's check out the last 3 decks in this video. Amber, Amethyst, Aggro, honestly, it's just a pedal to the metal deck. I'm going to give a shout out to Bananable. Bananable has a full video covering this deck that I watched, and it really inspired me to add this particular list and give him a shout out. The link to the description of the video will be in the description of this video, so please give it a follow if you're looking for just gameplay action. He played some games on Tabletop Simulator with some of his teammates and things like that, and it really showcases how quick this deck truly is. And what I really want to point about this particular list in general is that I feel that this might be the premier deck that says, in order for my deck to be considered, no matter what the deck is, this deck is probably the bar. So if you make a deck and you're like, oh, this deck is fun, it's really cool, it does really cool stuff, like for example, the Sapphire Steel deck that we just covered, like, yeah, that deck might be really cool, it might be really fun. But if this deck wins on turn 5, then like that deck doesn't matter. If I can't play cards like Mufasa, play cards like Sheriff of Nottingham, if I can't even get them in play because this deck is on 18 lore on turn 4, then I need to rethink the metagame. I need to rethink my strategy. So this is really going to be a bar, I think. And it's one of those just proving how powerful Daisy Duck really is, how powerful, cheap, effective 1 lore and 2 lore characters are. So that's why we're focusing on this. Let's talk about it a little bit, but definitely check out Banable's video on it in the description below. So the new pieces to this deck that we didn't have before are Daisy Duck and Amethyst Chromacon. They're really it. Everything else is set 1 through 4 cards. It's understanding how much power cards like Lilo and Maleficent and Piglet really have. Finally giving Donald Duck some love because it's one of my favorite cards in Ursula's Return that didn't get a whole bunch of play because his ability just wasn't relevant enough. The decks didn't really need this 2/3 bodyguard on 3, but this deck very much does. Also, Baloo, there's a lot going on here. I also firmly believe that this deck is not defined, but it's a fantastic starting point. This concept of just having all these cards in play, having Broom and Chernobog's followers to remove when necessary to draw cards when you're kind of running out of steam, having the bodyguard packages of Baloo and Donald Duck to kind of protect your early game. If your opponent can't get rid of a Daisy Duck before turn 3, and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, here's another speed bump, here's a Baloo that's going to give me 2 lore, here's a Donald Duck that's going to give me an additional lore and be a 2/3 body, to follow up, like with, if we ever go Daisy, Piglet, Donald, I mean, that's just insane. Like the amount of throughput lore that you're getting there is like just amazing. It's really, really threatening. The other key thing that this deck does so very well is spit out all of its cards. And, the whole time you're letting Daisy Duck draw your opponent cards anyway. So a card like Amethyst Chromacon that just allows your opponent to draw more cards, you just don't care. You just want to put this card into play on like turn 4 And then from that point forward, for the rest of the game, the only goal is to either set up a combo win with Go and Bounce, or threaten the game each turn with 1 and 2, like with 2 and 3 lore characters on repeat. If you're continuously like, hey, I'm going to draw 2 cards a turn and they're always going to be 3 or 4 lore, your opponent just always has to answer 3 or 4 lore after you already gained 12 or more lore before turn 4 ever happened. Having Baloo and Goat is a lot of lore outside of questing as well. This deck really is just pure aggression, and I think it's going to be a very, very high bar to match for a lot of decks in the metagame trying to figure out what are the best ways to interact with this much of an aggro deck that can pressure so much of the game early and have so much draw potential because of Amethyst Chromacon. And obviously, the Dolores and Merlin are fine. They're just conditional cards that are going to get you a little bit more extra. But realistically, the whole deck comes down to Daisy Duck, Piglet, and Amethyst Chromacon. Those 3 cards are the key and core components of this deck's true success. Whew, guys, this deck might be the craziest deck to start with. It is so difficult for me to tell you if this deck is going to be a true contender or not, but I had to put this on the list. I got to give a shout out to Colby. He's a teammate of mine, and he just loves innovation. He loves trying to find these decks that are just so out there, so wonky, and really, when you put down the deck on the table and start playing games, your opponent has no idea what's going on. Let's try and break this down, but it is a difficult one to understand. Obviously, at the very core, we are an Amber Ruby deck, which makes us a Rapunzel deck. There are no Mufasas in this deck. We're not on that line whatsoever, but we do have the entirety of the heal package with Mulan, with Mother Gothel, playing Julieta, playing Rapunzel. The newer cards that we're adding to this mix is Robin Hood. Robin Hood Sharpshooter is a 4-cost, uninkable, 1 strength, 4 willpower with 2 lore, and its ability is My Greatest Performance. Whenever this character quests, look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You may reveal an action card with cost 6 or less and play it for free, and put the rest in your discard. Okay, so if we break down this ability and what the most ideal thing you can do in a turn with this deck is quest with Robin Hood. And in the quest with Robin Hood, we're going to reveal a revive, but while this is happening, we're going to put a Jim Hawkins into the discard pile. This is the best case scenario. If we can reveal, revive, and put Jim into the discard pile, all of a sudden what ends up happening is we can revive our Jim Hawkins, and then with Jim Hawkins, we can play an RLS Legacy or play a Pride Lands. Now, we all know what RLS Legacy does. Moving into it, getting evasive, getting an 8 willpower card, great. But what does Pride Lands do? So Pride Lands is a 3-cost inkable, 2 to move to, 8 willpower, 1 lore, inkable location, right? So if we get 8 willpower on an inkable location for 3, but it also has the ability of Our Humble Home. While you have 3 or more characters here, you may banish this location and play a character from your discard pile for free. So now all of a sudden, we're gaining this position where we played a Robin, or we quested with a Robin, we revived our Jim, we got back Pride Lands, put another 8 willpower into play, and we got to move there for free. So the very next turn, we have the ability to play cards and tuck to it, get a bunch of cards into play, banish the location, and then play another gigantic card. Bring back a Rapunzel, draw more cards, bring back your Robin Hood that is likely did not untap, right? All of these things can happen. It does a lot of crazy and fun stuff. And because of all that, all the silly stuff that we're trying to do, we're also playing a card like Just in Time. Just in Time, putting in a card like Rapunzel early to heal our Mother Gothels to draw a bunch of cards is great. Putting Jim into play early to put a card like RLS Legacy out early is huge. Even getting the Queen early is pretty massive. But even just in timing Robin Hood to start this trigger of Robin Hood early is also really great. The follow-ups here are Queen of Hearts and the Rapunzel Floodborn character as well. Now, Queen of Hearts, obviously, when you challenge, you get to draw a card. The Rapunzel is whenever you heal, you get to draw a card, which brings in the Amber Chromacon, which is simply exert, remove one damage, up to one damage from each of your characters. The Rapunzel reads whenever a character is healed, draw a card, which means if you can remove multiple damage from multiple cards, we're drawing multiple cards. So this deck has the ability to draw basically infinite cards through so many different variations of ways while pressuring the game in a very interesting manner. I think this is one of like the craziest ideas to start with early. It looks like a ton of fun, and it's probably the first deck I'm gonna play with this weekend, if I'm being honest, just because of how intrigued I am by the entire concept. We'll have to see how it plays out. I can't wait to report on this one moving forward in the Shimmer Size metagame. Last but not least, Emerald Amber Songs. So this is a deck that we have seen plenty of, if I'm being honest. The key additions again are Daisy and Prince Naveen. The other small addition to this is Blast from the Past, which is a 6-cost uninkable song that reads, name a card, return all character cards with that name from your discard to your hand. And as you can see, we're very much being focused on being a Daisy Duck deck. We have 11 Daisy Ducks in the deck, which is obviously the most value we can get out of the card if we can return multiple Daisy Ducks. But you can really develop this list further if you would like to and play multiple Flynn Riders. You can play multiple Ursulas. So Blast for the Past could be more value if you wanted to make a more commitment to the card. I feel that Daisy Duck is fine. Blast for the Past only really being good in this particular list with Daisy is fine. Getting back your 1/4s is spectacular at any point in the game. And both of the 4-cost Amber and Emerald Daisy Ducks really fit the style of this deck. So it's fine getting back those cards as well. And in the end, they are inkable. So this is really just trying out Blast for the Past and seeing if only playing one card as 11 copies is good enough. If it's not, again, we can convert the deck to play more Flynn Riders, play more Ursulas and things like that. Obviously, Diablo is another one. You can play the Diablo one. There's a ton that can be worked around with this, which is kind of the point of, hey, this is an alpha version deck, so we're just trying out our best. But at the end of the day, the understanding here is playing cards like Daisy Duck and Naveen are very good for Amber decks. It's really putting Amber back on the map and giving it a ton of playability within Disney Lorcana. Prince Naveen in this list, coming in, playing a song upon play, utilizing the muses to bounce something back to your opponent's hand or bounce your own card back to your hand, and then even playing a card like We Don't Talk About Bruno or even You're Welcome. You can actually set up pretty crazy lines later in the game where you can play Prince Naveen, put a card back in your opponent's hand, and then You Have Forgotten Me it, or Quest It Away with Daisy. Do all these really type of fun combos of cards. Even if you play You're Welcome or We Don't Talk About Bruno, these are all great. You can sing, of course, the Bare Necessities as well to remove a card. And then all the while, all of these cards work so very well with the Prince John here. So this deck really is this aggro control deck where we are very focused on gaining a bunch of cheap lore out of our 1 and 2 cost characters, drawing a bunch of cards with our 3-cost characters in Prince John and Diablo, and then, of course, utilizing our singer mechanic from Prince Naveen and Ariel, and effectively getting a shift play line with Prince Naveen as well without ever needing to shift and sing songs. This deck really comes at one of the more impactful threatens, I think, in the game. And I think it's going to be one of the more fun decks to play in the Shimmering Skies metagame as we try and figure out what the best version of this deck is going to look like. So there we have it, 7 brand new decks to start with in Disney Lorcana. And if I'm being honest, this is just the first 7. I think that there are so many more combinations that are going to see the light of day. Amethyst Sapphire is not even on this list. Definitely playable. Ruby Sapphire, definitely playable. There's definitely more that can be done. I just didn't want this video to be like just over the top crazy. So I might even do a second video following this up with 5 or 7 more decks to do and talk about as well. These were just the most exciting ones for me. I really wanted to get the point across that, hey, Amber is back. Daisy Duck and Prince Naveen are insane. These cards are just going to be so dominant in the metagame. I can't wait to start playing with them. I'm very, very excited for Shimmering Skies, guys. But hey, listen, I just put 7 decks here. I'm not even saying that any of these 7 decks are the best deck in the game, but I want to know what you think the best new deck is. I definitely want to know where you're going to starting with, what you're excited with in Shimmering Skies. Let me know in the comments below. Let's have a fun conversation about what Shimmering Skies is really developing in this brand new metagame. I think it has some of the more playable cards and interactions in Disney Lorcana. I really feel that Shimmering Skies push the limit further than Ursula's Return and further than Inklands did as well. I think this is the most powerful set since Rise of the Floodborn. So I'm very excited for it. I hope you guys are excited for it too. If you like this video, please hit the like button for me. If you're new to the channel and you like stuff like this, we are probably a couple weeks away from the first official meta report, but this is definitely a nice way to start and kind of get all those juices flowing and your mind racing and going, hey, what can I do with this new set? I am very excited to start playing with this set, get the cards in my hand, and start building decks. And of course, just play Disney Lorcana. It's going to be a great couple of weeks leading up to the release, which is honestly 2 days from now. Bunch of new cards, DLCs coming up in Toronto. It hasn't been announced yet, but we have to assume the side events are going to be having this set legal. So if you get some free time, you want to play a side event on Friday, you might even be able to play with it on Friday. If you don't make the top 64, and play with it on Saturday, on Sunday. Lots of time to really start getting that juices going as we start developing a metagame for Birmingham and for DLC Vegas. Very excited for all those things. Cannot wait to hear about what you guys' thoughts are in the comments, and we will catch you in the next video.